Hi, my little Calaveras, and welcome to my channel. If you're returning, welcome back. If you're new, hi, hello, I'm Jinx, and today we are going to read a story about a mysterious gallery. I do also want to give you a heads up that this story does skip around a little bit and refers to the author's childhood as well as teenage years. It is all a part of the story, but it is how it's written, so I just wanted to give you a heads up just in case it is a little confusing at first. But with that being said, let's go ahead and sit back, relax, and enjoy the story together. I've always felt profoundly relieved to put that burning city behind me. Move past the death and destruction. Divide myself from the ash and the ruins, the rust-colored clouds and the blood-orange sky. Out of sight, out of mind. Towering steel doors shut as I stepped into the gallery. I sighed, allowing my shoulder to sag as I slowly twisted my neck. Left to right, right to left. The AC hummed, and its crisp, metallic breath crawled over my exposed skin. My body cooled. The muscles in my neck began to unwind. This was my sanctuary, the last building standing, a great marble raft drifting above an ocean of rubble. I couldn't let myself relax completely, though. Yes, the gallery was safer than the inferno outside its walls, much safer. But it came with its own risks. Because it wasn't just my sanctuary. I shared the refuge with one other person. Unlike me, she never seemed to leave. She usually wasn't visible when I entered, but she was always there. If I couldn't see her, that meant she was in the walls. If she was in the walls, she'd be knocking her forehead against the marble. She didn't have any knuckles, so the woman made her skull an instrument. Same pattern every time, measured and deliberate. Tap, pause. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, tap. The knocks were gentle, but the sound carried generously through the cavernous studio floor. It was a single box-shaped room with 30-foot-tall ceilings and not a lot in between. Each wall held a few paintings of artists of no renown. There was a spiral staircase in the center, but the 60-80 metal steps led to nowhere, abruptly stopping 2/3 of the way up. And most cryptically, there was the elevator, directly across from the entrance. No buttons to call the damn thing. The outline of a down arrow above the doors I'd never seen flash. No one ever came out, and I knew no one ever would either. The elevator was a one-way trip, constructed for me alone. Wasn't ever sure how I knew the fact, but I'd bet my life on its truthfulness 20 times over. So there I'd be, by myself on the gallery floor, that snake of a woman slithering through its walls, surrounded by an empty, burning city for miles in every direction. It would always start with me approaching the massive steel doors, waves of heat galloping over my back, but when it would end was variable. It could take minutes, it could take hours. On rare occasions, it could take days or even weeks. Eventually, though, I'd wake up. The same inscrutable dream, every night without fail, for over 15 years. A transmission from the depths of a hollow reality that I never understood until last night. Tap, pause. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, tap. my birth. Ever since I can remember, I felt out of place, an outsider among my own species. I'm sure a lot of people experience a similar pariahhood, and obviously can't confirm my lived experience is distinct or extraordinary in comparison. Let me provide an example, some object of proof of my otherness. As soon as I drew my first breath, my mother's heart stopped. Spontaneous cardiac arrest. No rhyme or reason. An unceremonious end. Like the death of an old car battery. The medical team leapt into action. A few doses of IV adrenaline later, the muscle warily returned to duty. But the moment her heart restarted, mine then stopped. Then they'd resuscitate me, only to have my mother die again. So on and so on. The way my dad used to tell it, the doctors became incrementally more unnerved and bewildered each time we flipped. Life was a zero-sum game in that operating room. It was either me or her, and there was nothing they could do to change that. An unshakable declaration from God, or the Reaper, or whatever unknowable divinity would be in charge of such an edict. The uncanny tug-of-war would have probably been amusing to witness if the implications weren't so deeply tragic. 3 or 4 cycles later, my mother's heart gave out completely, obstinately refused to beat, no matter what the medical team did. Dad would sometimes theorize that it was an active decision made by the doctors that handled her care, even if they didn't have the balls to admit it. Like, once they realized that one of us was dying, they arbitrarily awarded me with life. Started covertly injecting saline into my mother's veins instead of adrenaline or something. I doubt that last part actually happened. The circumstances were just viciously unfair. And that type of thing is fertile soil for growing conspiracy. Regardless, I felt his pain. See, that's the rub. Although I've always felt like an outsider, that doesn't mean I've lacked empathy. I have reverence for the people around me. I've just never felt connected to any of them. I'm like a naturalist living alone in the jungle. I love the flora and the fauna. I respect the miracle that nature represents. But at the end of the day, I'm still alone, which brings me to Anthony. My childhood. I experienced a fair amount of bullying as a kid. Probably became a target on the account of my quiet nature and my social isolation. A lone gazelle straying too far from the safety of the herd. They didn't scare me much, though. I just couldn't see them as predators. More like flies buzzing around my head. Noisy and a smidge irritating, but ultimately harmless. That was the problem. They wanted to feel like predators, and I wasn't providing the sensation. Inciting fear and misery made them feel in control. So, when they couldn't get a rise out of me with their routine arson of schoolyard mockery, things escalated. And every time a new prank was enacted, a curtain of milk spilled over my head, a few spiders dumped in my backpack, etc., I would notice Anthony watching from the sidelines, livid on my behalf. Tall for his age, frizzy black hair, blue eyes, boiling over with anger behind a thick pair of square glasses. One afternoon, Austin, a dumber and more violent breed of bully, became fed up with my relative disinterest, decided to take the torment up a notch. He snuck up from behind me while I was eating lunch, stuck a meaty fist into my bun, and yanked a thick chunk of my hair from my scalp. That certainly was my line in the sand. It was Anthony's too, apparently. I spun around. Before he could even gloat, I lunged forward, opened my jaw, and bit down hard on his nearest elbow. At the same time, Anthony had been running up behind him with a metal lunch tray arched over his shoulder. The shiny rectangle connected to Austin's temple with a loud clatter, almost like the ringing of a gong. It was a real 1-2 punch. An hour later, Anthony and I had our first conversation outside the principal's office, both waiting to be interrogated. I've never been quite comfortable with the way that he looked at me, even back then. His grin was too wide, his focus too intense. On the surface, it was an affectionate expression, but there was something dark looming behind it all. A possessiveness, a smoldering infatuation that bordered on obsession. I tried to ignore it because I genuinely did like him. As a friend. He was the only one I felt comfortable with confiding in. The only person who knew of the gallery and the burning city, other than myself. Now, there's no one else. This post is designed to fix that. The gallery. Ija conquers the Tyrannodos was my favorite. The first word is pronounced Ide, I think. It wasn't the largest painting in the gallery, nor was it the most technically impressive. There was just something bewitching about that piece, though. I found myself hopelessly magnetized to it for hours every night. 1 foot long by half a foot tall, the frame composed of small, alternating suns and moons carved into the wood. It depicted a single-armed Valkyrie with white wings and dull gray armor, lying on her back under the shade of a willow tree. A creature with a body of a man and a head of a stag is descending on her. Its face is contorted into a vicious snarl, arms outstretched with violent intent. The beast seems unaware of the serrated dagger in the Valkyrie's singular hand, tenting the skin on the right side of its neck, about to draw blood. Oil paint lended the scene a striking vibrancy. The grass appeared lush, almost palpable. The hair on the beast's knuckles looked matted and dense, like it was overflowing with grease. Studying that canvas made me feel alive, more than I've ever felt in the waking world, honestly. However, that invigoration would fade into unease the moment my eyes landed on the 2 black holes above the Valkyrie's head. Because they weren't some bizarre artistic choice. They were holes, literally. Every painting in the gallery had a pair of them. She liked to watch me look at the paintings every so often. When she did, 2 bloodshot eyes would intensely monitor my gaze. Sometimes she'd watch for so long, without blinking, that tears would drip down the length of the piece. Eventually, the frame would tremble with her message. Tap, pause. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, tap. My adolescence. What's the holdup then? Just do it already. 17-year-old me proclaimed, unafraid and defiant. The man in the ski mask tilted his head. His glare dissipated. I stepped closer. The employee behind the counter stopped pulling bills from the register, eyes wide in disbelief. Quinn? What the fuck are you doing? Anthony hissed, cowering behind a nearby rack of chips. I sniffed the air, ran my fingers along the countertop while licking my lips, surveyed my surroundings by turning my head, and perked up my ears for unusual sounds. Smell, touch, taste, sight, hearing. I resampled them all. Everything was as it should be. I felt my confidence balloon further. I'll do it, bitch. I'll shoot. I ain't afraid. I'll spatter your guts across the fucking floor. The would-be criminal stuttered. I stepped even closer, close enough that the barrel of his pistol began digging into my chest. Yeah? I heard you the first time, man. I smiled, baring my teeth. So do it then. Look, I'm making it easy for you. Don't even have to aim. Like the flick of a switch, his demeanor changed. The gunman's bravado collapsed in on itself, falling apart like paper mache in the rain. Without saying a word, he sprinted from that CPS and disappeared into the night. I flipped around so I could face Anthony, closed my eyes, and took an exaggerated bow. He wasn't applauding. Neither was the flabbergasted kid behind the cash register, for that matter. But I, sure as shit, pretended they were. I was damn proud of my little parlor trick. Later that night, though, I'd ruined the magic. Anthony was insistent. Just wouldn't let it go. He wore me down. So I told him that I didn't experience any synesthesia. That meant we were safe. No one in that convenience store was going to die. My performance was just a logical extrapolation of that arcane knowledge. No one was going to die relatively soon, anyway. My first dream of the burning city and the gallery came the night of my 11th birthday. My ability to sense approaching death came soon after. Synesthesia, for those of you unaware, is a neurological condition where the stimulation of one sense becomes involuntarily translated into the language of another sense. But that probably sounds like a bunch of medical lanther. So let me provide you a few examples. That man tasted loud. The apple felt bright. The musical note sounded purple. You get the idea. It's like the nerves getting their wires crossed. A whole year before his death, my grandfather looked salty. His apartment smelled quiet. His voice sounded circular. And all of those queer sensations only became more intense as his expiration date approached. Eventually, I picked up on the pattern. Once I grasped the bounds of my extrasensory insight, death lost its hold over me. You see, death draws a lot of its power from anticipation. People don't like surprises, especially shitty ones. Nobody wants to be startled by the proverbial monster under the bed. I, however, had become liberated. I could feel death's advance from miles away. Therefore, I had nothing to fear. Nothing at all. At least that's what I used to believe when I was young and dumb. Unfortunately, there were two major flaws in my supposed invulnerability that I completely swept under the rug. You may be shouting them at your computer screen already. 1. Just because I could sense death didn't mean that I was shielded from the tragedies of life. 2. I didn't know for certain that I could sense everyone's death. There's one person in particular who would be unverifiable by definition. How could I be so sure that I was capable of sensing my own death coming if I never had died before? The gallery. The night of my 12th birthday, she revealed herself. She finally came out. There was a crack aside the elevator, no larger than the size of a volleyball. It was impossible to see what lay beyond that crack. Its darkness was impenetrable. The woman wriggled out of the darkness and slithered towards me. She had somehow been reduced to just a head, with a spinal cord lagging behind it, acting as her tail. Her movements were distinctly reptilian, rows of vertebrae swinging side to side, creating U-shaped waves of rattling bones as she glided across the marble floor. I couldn't see her face until she was only a few feet away. Long, unkempt strands of gray hair obscured her features. Wreathing them behind a layer of silver filaments like the blinds on a window. There was a crater in the center of her forehead. A quarter-sized circle of her skull had been completely pulverized from the incessant knocking. She twirled around my leg, spiraling up my torso until she was high enough to drape her spinal cord over my shoulders. Then we were face to face. And she spoke the only 8 words I've heard her spill from her withered lips until last night. Are you ready to see what is below? I shook my head. She looked disappointed. Then I woke up. 365 days later, she wriggled out from the crack again to ask me the same question. Year after year after year. My early 20s. In order for you to understand what transpired over the last 24 hours, I need to explain me and Anthony's falling out. The summer before I went away to college, he arrived at my doorstep and professed that he was in love with me. Had been for a long time, apparently. His speech laid out all the gory details. How he believed we were soulmates. How perfect our children were going to be. How honored he was to get to die by my side. Note the language. It wasn't that he believed we could be soulmates, or that our children could be perfect. No, that phrasing was much too indefinite. From his perspective, our future was already sealed, written in the stars, whether I liked it or not. I tried to ease him back to reality gently, reiterated the same talking points I'd harped on since he hit puberty. Romantic love wasn't in the cards for me. I was incapable of experiencing that level of connection with anyone. It had nothing to do with the value of him as a person or as a potential mate. My rejection wasn't a judgment. He wouldn't hear it. Instead, he accused me of being a stuck-up bitch through bouts of rage-tinted sobs. I was going to college and he was staying in our hometown to take a job at his father's factory. That must be it, he realized out loud. I didn't feel like he was good enough for me. He lacked prestige. I think I responded to those accusations with something along the lines of, "Listen, Anthony, I don't think I'm better than you. It's not like that at all. We're just different. Fundamentally different. I'm sorry, but that's never going to change either. Not for you, not for anyone else." In retrospect, maybe I could have selected cleaner verbiage. In the heat of the moment, I don't think he took my words as I intended. From there, Anthony hurled a chair through my house's living room window, stomped out of the front door, and exited my life for a little over 5 years. Current day. Fast forward to last week. I returned to my hometown from my apartment in the city due to the death of my father, something I began having inklings of 2 years ahead of time. After the funeral, I focused on getting his estate in order, only venturing down onto the main street once in the 7 days I've been here. The coffee machine broke, and I was in dire straits. And who do I just happen to run into? Anthony. Honestly, I barely recognized him. He was no longer sporting a lanky frame, frizzy black hair, and thick bottle cap glasses. His body was muscular, almost Herculean. He slicked back his hair, varnishing it with some hideously pungent, over-the-counter male beauty product. He no longer wore glasses now that he was able to afford a LASIK procedure. Cured his short-sightedness for good. I couldn't detect the same darkness behind his eyes anymore. But that wasn't because something purged it from his system. He'd just gotten more proficient at hiding it. Last night, we went out for dinner and a drink, platonically. I made that exceptionally transparent from the get-go. He teased me in response, inquiring whether my boyfriend in the city would come kick the shit out of him if he heard I was out with an old flame. For what felt like the millionth time, I explained to Anthony I wasn't interested in that type of connection. Thus, I was single. That made him smile. Inevitably, he invited me back to his apartment. He was very proud of his lucrative new position in his company and the luxuries that came with it. He wanted to show off. I almost reminded him that it wasn't his company, it was his father's company. To avoid conflict, I held my tongue. It might sound insane that I agreed to his invitation. Like I said, he concealed his darkness well. Anthony may have grown up to be a bit of a tool, but he was still the only person I ever felt close with. I was genuinely interested in seeing how his life had turned out. I wasn't experiencing any synesthesia around him either. To me, that indicated relative safety. No one was going to die. If he tried something lecherous, an act of depravity that may not necessarily inflict death, well, that's what pepper spray is for. Anthony lived in a 2-story brick row home on the outskirts of town. I walked in the door and was greeted by a tiny entrance nook, followed by an extensive set of stairs, which led up to his ostentatious foyer/entertainment room. I won't lie, it was impressive. That was the point, I think. His home was just a big, glossy distraction. Something to keep your attention away from the bedeviled man who lurked within. Barely even noticed him tapping on some home security dashboard to the right of the front door. I do remember hearing the heavy click of the motorized lock, though. At that point, I was already walking up the stairs. For the next hour, we sat across from each other on the massive sofa sectional in his foyer, chit-chatting over an additional glass of wine. Eventually, though, enough was enough. I think he sensed that I was preparing to excuse myself and go home, because he leaned over, grabbed one of the 5 stout candles off the coffee table, and began lighting the wick with a box of matches he pulled out of his blazer pocket. I told Anthony it was getting late, and that it was time for me to leave. He didn't say anything. He didn't react to the sentence at all. He kept silently lighting the candles. When I witnessed the reflection of the burning wick in his eyes, I realized I made a mistake. Fine, I thought. I don't need his permission to leave. He didn't say anything as I darted past him, jogging down the stairs. I pulled the knob to the front door. It didn't budge. There wasn't any obvious way to unlock it either. Anthony, can you kindly help me unlock the front door? I called up, experiencing terror for the first time in years. A voracious chill eating its way up through my chest. Nothing. No response. Not a peep. Instead, the lights clicked off. I felt a lump grow in the back of my throat. Sweat poured over my temples. I perked my ears. No footfalls. No sound. No synthesias. Just darkness oozing down from the silent corridor. A lurching tidal wave of black tar moments away from swallowing me whole. I reached into my purse for my cell phone. Then, furious movement down the stairs. The sound of heavy boots stomping on the hard wood filled my ears. Before I could react, he was looming over me. An open hand exploded out from the shadows and hooked onto my blouse collar. With one forceful pull, he yanked me to the ground. The bridge of my nose crashed into the edge of the stair as I fell. Electric pain writhed and crackled over my sinuses. My mouth felt hot and boggy as he lugged me back to the foyer. Anthony quickly pinned me to the floor in front of the coffee table. I thrashed and struggled, but it wasn't much use. He had positioned one muscular knee on each of my elbows. I was trapped. Without uttering a word, he wrapped his meaty claws around my neck and squeezed. The veins in his head pulsed, his face swollen with fury. I started to see double. Consciousness liquefied and slipped through my fingertips. I closed my eyes. With the last few grains of life I had left, I thought of my favorite painting. Ija conquers the Tyrannodos. I wanted to die with its beauty graffitied on the inside of my skull. Unexpectedly, there was a tearing of flesh and a soggy gurgle, followed by a few sputtering coughs. Anthony's hands released. Oxygen rushed into my starved lungs. I opened my eyes. A serrated dagger had plunged into the soft flesh of his neck, skewering it completely. I saw a bit of the blade poking through the other side. Dewdrops of blood and plasma seeped from the fatal wound, trickling over his collarbone and dripping onto my blouse. The scent of iron quickly coated the interior of my broken nose. A hand still tightly gripped the dagger's handle. But Anthony's heavy knees had never left my elbows. It wasn't mine, but it came from me. I traced the ethereal limb from the knife to the center of my ribcage, where it had sprouted. And it was as swiftly as it appeared, the limb and the dagger vanished. Before Anthony collapsed on top of me, I used my freed hands to push him off and onto the side. He fell, hitting the coffee table as he tumbled. The resulting collision sent 5 burning candles crashing onto the large cotton blanket nearby. His foyer became a bonfire. I stood up, still weak and woozy from the prolonged suffocation. The sofa had caught on fire too. Harsh, black smoke began to diffuse throughout the apartment. I raced down the stairs once again, but I reached a similar impasse. The door remained mechanically locked. I screamed, cried out for someone to hear me, twisted the knob so hard that it tore the skin on my right palm. All the while, a conflagration bloomed behind me. I shifted my attention to the digital security dashboard aside the door. I pushed my fingers against the keyboard. The device whirred to life. 4 asterisks stood in my way. A PIN number was required to get to the home screen. I tried my birthday. 2 digits for the month, 2 digits for the year. Incorrect. A warning on the screen read, 2 attempts left. I tried Anthony's birthday. Nothing. 1 attempt left. My panic intensified, reaching a fever pitch in tandem with the ravenous flames 1 floor above. Then, I heard it. At least, I think I heard it. Maybe my mind just clicked into place, and the realization was so profound that it felt like the noise began physically swirling around me. Yet, I distinctly remember hearing the knocking from within the wall behind me. Tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, 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 tap. Pause. Tap, tap. I held my breath. 1, 3, 4, 2. The screen opened. I clicked unlock, twisted the knob, pushed my body against the door, and spilled out onto the street. The gallery. When I arrived last night, a few hours after Anthony died, something was different. The woman slithered out of the crack and started towards me. I met her halfway next to the spiral stairs. She grinned at me from the floor. For the first time, I asked her a question. Why could I not sense that Anthony was going to die? She glided up my leg, draping her spine over my shoulders so she could be eye to eye with me. When she spoke, her sentence lacked the 1, 3, 4, 2 rhythmic structure I had come to know her by. Her voice was high-pitched and raspy, and her mouth didn't actually move when she talked. It just kept ajar and the words flowed out. Because he was never supposed to die last night. You were supposed to die last night. That's what was written. You can't foretell something that has never been written. Her grin became sharper, and the corners of her mouth rapturous and grim. But I intervened. You'd never get to the gallery unless I did something about it. Took a lot of work and planning, but I did it. We did it. Then it was her turn to ask me something. Are you ready to see what's below? I nodded. Immediately, the down arrow above the elevator lit up bright red. The chiming sound echoed through the gallery. The doors opened, and I gasped. There was a headless body of a woman standing motionless inside the elevator, wearing a silver cocktail dress with the edges of a bloody hospital gown peeking out from underneath. She held a balloon in her hand. The side of it read, "Happy Birthday," in a rainbow of colors. The woman's head and spine slithered ahead of me. It scaled the decapitated body and inserted its tail into the dry flesh between the body's collarbones until the head was snugly attached. I walked over and stepped in. The inside glistened, polished, and reflective like a mirror. For the first time, I saw myself as I was within the gallery. I had always assumed I was the same age in the waking world as I was in my dreams. But I wasn't. I was much, much older. And the revelation really got me thinking. Maybe the gallery has never been a dream. Maybe it's been more of a premonition. A vision of the future. The sight of a colossal marble coffin towering above the ruins of an ever-burning city. An altar to the new gods of a new age. The woman's newly fastened head turned to me and whispered, "If you wake up before we get there, that's okay. You're finally safe. We can try again every night without fear." Eventually, with enough practice, you'll make it over the apotheotic threshold. We can bring this all to fruition, my love. My single-armed Valkyrie, my deep red moon, my one and only daughter. And then I woke up. Hi, my little Calaveras. Now, if you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much. I truly appreciate you being here. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. Also, like, comment, share, all the good things. And I hope you enjoyed this story. It took me a little bit longer than I expected, but I really did enjoy the story. I know there are a couple topics that are a little meh, but I kind of did like the mystery of what she was going through and the actual reason for the gallery and that twist at the end. I hope you enjoyed it. I know it was a little bit darker than what I normally read, and it's not for everybody, so I completely understand if it wasn't for you. But also, don't forget, in my description box, I have my socials, so you can always be updated when I'm going to upload, as well as my Gmail if you want to submit a story to potentially be read here. But since this is a longer story, I'm going to go ahead and go before I start rambling. And remember, my little Calaveras, don't let anyone or anything steal your light. Check under your bed at night. And until next time, bye.